Hello everybody, welcome to my first guide here in one of the most exciting areas here we can do with this notebook, which is of course video. And I'm going to start here going right into the 3D video, which I've always thought is the best video, even if you're not trying to make something 3D. It does give it more depth, but it has a lot of features like cadence that the 2D doesn't have, things like that, but they both kind of have their own flavor. So I'm just going to go down here first, like always, and just show you my settings I'm doing for this guide here. And I like to do these guys just right in the notebook, nothing kind of extraneous, just the exact way that you would do it. So I think that makes it a little easier to follow. So we're going to go ahead here and just start right up. And let me see, I am using the V2 model here, mainly just because it does have the not safe for work stuff, so I can use this and not have to worry about editing later on YouTube or running something twice. Usually you can still get some stuff, but that's why I'm using it. You can, of course, use any of these models here for video. And I would encourage you also to experiment around with these. The good thing is that this is all built right into the notebook, where before we'd have to download custom models, which I do have a lot of custom models. I actually like making them too. And I'm using the V2 for this, but like I said, use any model here you want. I'm just using this for the purpose of the video, but I use a lot of different models. And I'm just gonna, that's the only thing I'm changing then. Yeah, then this comes standard. I do have my custom model here, but I'm not going to use it, not yet. So we're just going to load it up here, and then we're going to get down into the fun stuff down here in animation mode. Okay, and while this is loading up, I'm going to kind of go down here and start showing you some of the most important parameters here. So again, this is going to be just the basics of 3D animation. I'm going to get into like things like math function and other areas later, but for now we're just going to stick mainly to movement. We'll see. Let's just start going here, and I'm going to go down the list here. So the first thing we're going to do, of course, is to put it into 3D for 3D animation. So if you see, there are 4 built-in functions here. Well, 5 if you count the none, which is just still images. So we're going to start here with the 3D. And the main difference between the 3D and the 2D is going to be right here in the movement parameters, but they've actually added some things now as well to kind of give 2D the same sort of effects you can do here now. So again, like I've been saying, this is a great notebook. So the first thing we're going to do here is go down the list, and right now max frames. So this is going to determine the number of frames total for your movie. So right now this is just a 200 frame movie, and I'm just going to keep it like that for this to kind of keep it small and manageable. Now these next two settings here, angle and zoom, we will not use it all in 3D mode. Those are used for 2D mode, so we'll get into that later with 2D mode. So 3D does have the same equivalence though. So the zoom in 3D mode is actually right here, the translation Z. So if you notice, that is the only one that I've given any value to. Okay, and then going down the list here, our next one is Translation X. And what this does, first of all, when you think of 3D mode, think of it as a camera actually inside the scene. Like think of your still image there as a 3D video game level. So Translation X and will make the camera move left or right. Translation Y will make the camera move up and down. And translation Z will make the camera move forward and backward. And I'll kind of draw some arrows to kind of illustrate that over here to the side in post edit. So these are the movement keys. These will actually move the camera like it's taking a step left or right, up or down, backwards or forward in that 3D environment. Now our rotations will do something similar, but they will rotate. So the rotation X will be a rotation of up and down, like you're tilting the nose of an aircraft up and down. The translation for the, or excuse me, the rotation for the 3DY will turn your head left or right, like you're in the scene looking left and right, turning your head left and right. And the translation Z will look, or excuse me, the rotation Z will be like a barrel roll. Like think of it as an airplane kind of doing a rotation, a barrel roll. So that is the difference between the translation and the rotation. And the next one here, like I said, we're going to ignore this. We'll get into this one with the 2D mode. And let's go down here to the noise schedule. Now what the noise schedule does is this will add pixels to the image, because diffusion, what it actually does is take away. It doesn't add, it takes away pixels to create the image. So what the noise does is if you have a solid black area, an area that turns solid black after a while, these are especially important in animations, much more so than still images. So the noise will keep adding pixels to the entire image. That way, you won't get an area that will just turn black, solid black, and stay that way, because that's what would happen otherwise. Like that used to happen a lot in the old days with disco diffusion. If you got an area that just turned a solid color, like solid black, it would just stay that way for the rest of the video. So this is also something that you kind of might want to turn up if your movement is faster, things like that. So everything kind of relates to everything else really with anything you're doing, especially in videos. Now, what the strength schedule is, this is a very important setting here. This, I would say the two most important settings here are probably your Z, which is your forward movement. You kind of always generally want to have a forward or a backward movement in animation. It doesn't handle left and right quite as well. So normally, aside from all the movement keys, you're going to have a steady kind of forward motion usually, or backward. You can also do the whole thing backward and then just, you know, run it backwards when the final video is done, things like that. But the strength schedule and the forward zoom, I would say, are the most important settings here. So the strength schedule will determine how much each frame you make looks like the previous frame. So if this is up really high, it will make each frame look a lot more like the previous frame and you will have less flickering. But let me show you what happens if we have that too high. And I'm just going to leave it here with a zoom of 2. So I would encourage you first to experiment just with these two settings, the zoom and the strength. Now the contrast, you can just leave that where it is. We won't worry about, don't mess with any of these yet either. These are for the hybrid video. And the unsharp mask, same thing. I'm just leaving these on the default right now. We'll play with all this stuff later. The color coherence, I usually just use these two, either the lab or the RGB. And now the cadence is another important setting. I'm going to just leave that on 4 for now. But what this does, this will speed up your render time because it will render the frames faster and will also keep it a little more coherent. So this is a really good feature. I usually have it at 6 or 4. You can also just put it all the way down to 1 and then it won't use it and it'll just be kind of like normal. But this is a really good feature for speeding up your animation. And as a general rule, the higher up you turn it, the more coherent it'll stay, but it'll also lose a bit of detail. So I usually like it around 4 or 6. Sometimes I just turn it off though to 1. It just depends. Now, the next feature here is depth warping. Leave this on when you're doing 3D. I know this didn't used to work unless it was checked on. This just kind of creates a depth map. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but I usually just leave it on. The FOV is the field of view. So the smaller it is, the closer up it will be. So FOV of 40 will be more kind of a close up, and you can widen it out to give you more of a kind of a panoramic view. And the movement, this will also affect the movements a bit. The wider it is, the less your movements will kind of have effect because you have a much wider screen there. So I usually leave it on about 60 or 40, but you can experiment with that. Again, these are ones you can kind of experiment with, but the most important settings to learn to make a coherent video and one that will run well is again going to be your strength and kind of your zoom too. So right now I have this way too high. I'll show you what's going to happen. And your zoom as well. Any of these settings, if they're up too high, you can just make your video ugly pretty quick. But I'm just going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and put this on 3. And we'll leave the strength there at 0.8, which again, I feel is too high. And we're going to see the effects there. We're not going to mess with anything else right now. This is the hybrid video, interpolation. So that's really the only kind of settings I would recommend if you're beginning to learn is learn your translation Z and your strength setting, and then the rest of them you can kind of play with later. Maybe play around a little bit with the cadence as well. I'd say this is number 3. This is probably third most important setting to learn for 3D video. So let's just go ahead and start now. And this is our prompt. This is the next thing. So right now I have and it's not going to use our prompt at all here. It's only going to use the animation prompt. And I've got a prompt there that was for my custom model I was testing. So I'm just going to replace that really quick with kind of this castle prompt. I believe I put this out in the weeklies a couple weeks ago for everybody. So we're just going to start with a castle, which is always kind of what I've traditionally started my videos with. So we're just going to use this prompt pretty much through the whole tutorial. I might throw in one at the end just for fun. But right now, that's going to be our prompt. So right now, it's just going to do the same prompt. And again, this is only 200 keyframes. And I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down to 512, which is, I'd recommend starting at 512 by 512. And I'm just going to use this to go a little faster. And this is the other thing. So in a video, you want to put your steps up about twice as much as you normally use for your image. Because what the strength does, if we go back up there to the strength is going to use your previous frame as kind of an input image for each next frame. That's how the videos maintain their coherence. So with this up real high though, this is actually only going to render 20 frames with it up at 100. So I'm actually going to put it up really high for this. And again, this is not a setting I would normally use. That strength setting is up too high, but I'm going to go ahead and show you. So I'm putting 120 steps here. And also, you don't want to put it on fixed for videos for the seed. We'll talk about that later in videos. For now, let's just get the resolution 512 by 512. And you don't have to follow me along on this one because this is just kind of a demo of showing you what happens when the strength is too high. And let's see here. Yeah, I think everything else here is good. So, and here's a couple images from my custom space model I was playing around with. I really like it so far. I've never really liked the space images I've got, so. And it was also voted on by my patrons for the model. So let's just go ahead and run this now. Let me change the batch name though. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and start this. And I'm just going to let it run for a little bit here, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what the result was here. One other thing, I do have the weights off just because I am using the 2.1 model. I'm not sure if that's fixed yet. I think that the weights don't work for some of the 2.1 models yet, but I'm sure that will come. But I'm just going to show you the beginning here to show you what I was talking about the frames and the strength. Okay, so our very first frame here, if you notice, it's going to render all 120 steps right there, which is what we set it at. 120 steps. So it's only going to do 120 steps for the very first frame. Okay, and then when it's done with the first 120 steps, then what it does for each subsequent frame is it just uses them based on your strength setting. And the cadence will speed it up again. If you notice, it's already up to frame 4. But if you notice now, it's only rendering 23 frames now for each image. So this is because of our strength setting. So again, this is going to stay pretty coherent for a little while here. It's going to look pretty good. But after a while, it's going to start to lose a lot of detail. The reason for that is because since it's using so much of the old frame, it's just gonna start looking bad after a while. So I'll go ahead and let this run for a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and render the video so I can show you why you don't want to, because it seems the natural thing is to want to put that up really high so that your video kind of stays looking the same, stays consistent, isn't flickering a lot. But everything is always kind of a trade-off with these AI videos, at least for now, until we, get the next generation of them. Okay, and we're up to frame 40 now, and if you notice, our castle's starting to get bent. We're starting to get just some kind of weird, ugly artifacts over here. And the new parts of the image that it's rendering does not look very good. And the reason for that is because that strength is so high that it's keeping so much of each old image that after a while it just it's building up too much of the old image. It basically isn't rendering enough new material to make it look good because it's having to keep too much of the old image. So that's why the strength setting too high can be bad. So I'll let it run a little longer just to kind of emphasize and show you the result here. Okay, and here we are about halfway through. I'm going to go ahead and let it finish just so I got a few seconds anyway to show you the video. So I just want to show you we're about halfway through here so you can see what it's doing. It's just, it doesn't really look very good. Everything just is kind of getting really distorted. There's a lot of artifacts everywhere. And again, this is just because it's just keeping too much of each of the old frame to kind of generate anything. It doesn't have time basically to generate enough new interesting material because we're telling it to keep 80% of the old frame basically. So that's why we're kind of just getting this kind of video is really going to get ugly here as it keeps going. And just to point out too, this is the other problem with the strength setting too high is once you do get these ugly areas, since it's keeping them in the next frame, they just get worse and worse. So you see we're kind of getting this spot over here. We're getting a lot of these kind of things floating in the air, and it's just going to get worse and worse. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just kind of starting off by showing you the two extremes of the strength setting, which is too high, and then we'll do too low after that, and I'll show you what too low means. Okay, here our video is starting to close out. As you can see, we got these ugly lines that are not going away. They're just going to build up on each other and get worse and worse because we're telling it to keep the image at 80% strength of the previous frame. So the next frame is going to look 80% like this frame, which is already looking pretty bad. Not as bad as I expected, though we actually can still kind of see a forest and a castle every once in a while. But that's just not a good setting to use for a very long period. You might maybe get away with doing it for 10 frames, and then if you crank it back down, get it changed. But you generally, if you just have it like a consistent number for your strength and you don't have it moving around a lot, you want it at about 0.65 or zero point 0.6. Those are kind of the two spots I would generally leave it at. So let's go ahead and create our video here and we can see in better detail what exactly this did with the strength setting up too high. Okay, here's our video. Now also a quick note, if this ever doesn't work, it does have some problems sometimes. You can just take your frames and edit them together in an external video. I'll probably do a tutorial on that someday. But as we can see, our castle here starts off looking pretty nice here. Let's go ahead and play it. And so if you notice too, it's not flickering. It's still staying pretty much like that castle. So it actually looks pretty good there for a little while. But then as we continue to go on, now it's just starting to look pretty ugly, and this is just going to continue. So that is the problem with the strength setting up too high. Again, it looks good for a little while. It kind of looks like a regular kind of 3D video game or something, but then it will quickly start to deteriorate as it's just using too much of each previous frame. And so you wind up with something like this that's only going to get worse. So let's go ahead now and we'll go to the next extreme here, which is the strength setting too low. And think about this as instead of creating coherent frames, it's just going to create a new image basically every frame if this is too low. So we'll go ahead and put this down at 0.2, which is way too low. And at that low though, I'm going to dial back the frames quite a bit because now it's only going to save 20% of each frame. So we'll just go ahead and put this at about 60. We'll start it, whoops, not that many, 70. We'll go ahead and start it at 70. So this will make we should get some better looking individual images. The problem is they're not going to have much relation to each other. It's just going to be more like a slideshow than a coherent video. Okay, and the cadence will also the cadence will mitigate that about a bit with the cadence up to 4 right now because the cadence kind of keeps each frame looking similar as well. So the cadence might mitigate some of the changing here, but this is going to start changing quite a bit. So it will just be a very flickery kind of video when it's done here. As you can see already, it's pretty much completely changed what it looked like before, and that's just going to continue. But our individual frames there do look a lot better than our last one did, and by the end of this video each frame will look a lot better, so this will give you some better images. The problem is it's just not going to look as much like a video. It's just going to be kind of a flickering, morphing, changing series of still images, which really is what the video always is. But what we're trying to do here is we're trying to create the illusion of a coherent video with our movement keys and our strength settings and everything. So let's go ahead and let this finish. We'll come check on it when it's done. Okay, I think I'm just going to cut in here and not let this one finish. If you can see, we're still getting some decent images here. It's up to about frame 100. But as you can see also, they are changing a lot. But as you can see, it's not going to deteriorate the way it did when we had too high a strength. Our image quality will pretty much probably stay around here. But let me show you where we'll run into the problem with this. When we make the video, we can see that even though it kind of looks good, it's generating, some nice, decent, respectable images there. Once we try to put it together as a video, it's going to just lose all coherency. It's just going to be a flickering slideshow, basically. And so there you see what that does. So this is with our strength setting too low. It's just going to kind of morph and change. So sometimes in a lot of my videos, what I'll do is I'll kind of throw in something like this every once in a while, just to kind of reboot the image and give it a nice image to start with, and then put the strength back up high again. So that's one technique. And again, I'm just kind of showing you what all these settings do. There's really a number of different ways to use this notebook in the video, and a lot that I'm sure are still undiscovered. So let's go ahead now and just go to a kind of a happy medium here, which is, I think, about 0.65, 0.6. Those are usually kind of the sweet spots if we're just having a straightforward zoom video, which again, I'd kind of recommend just doing this just to kind of learn it, learn how the videos work and how it's going to render them. So we're going to just turn this up to 0.65, which will start to kind of, actually, let's do a 0.62. And again, I just have the zoom here at 3. So this is going to be more just like kind of, I guess, what you would consider a normal video with some changing, but not like it is down here where it's just constantly, changing from one image to the next like that. But we also don't want it so high that it starts to look really ugly. So let's go ahead and let this render for a bit. Let me just see how many frames we're going to get there. Might need to turn the frame count up a bit. So a good frame count is usually, I'd say, a minimum of 30. You want it to render at least 30 steps for each of your frames. And I'm probably going to have to, this might be around 30. It's going to be a little less. This is probably going to be more like 20. Let me actually go ahead and turn this up to 80. I'm just going to do that now. I think that will be a little better. Yeah, this should give us a minimum of 30, I believe. We'll be right around there. So again, everything works in harmony with everything else. Every time you change one setting, like I just changed the steps, it's going to affect everything else. The steps are affected by your strength setting. The higher it is, the less steps it's going to do because it's maintaining more of that original image. So if strength was up to 100, it wouldn't do any steps. It would just keep 100% of the previous image, not render any steps for the new one. So you got to remember that too. There is no really best setting for each item. It just depends on what all your other settings are. So we'll go ahead and watch this for a while now. It looks like it's doing, hey, right on the nose there with 30 steps. Great. Okay, so that's about a minimum. So I've got it at about, I would say, a minimal amount of steps to keep generating new details. So we'll just let this run for a little while, and I might just let this run all the way to 200. Let's see how it looks at 200. Yeah, so I'm just going to let this run to 200, and we'll see how it looks after 200 frames at, what did I put, 0.62, I think? Yeah, 0.62, which is that should be a pretty good strength schedule there. I'd say, you can go as low as 0.55, but it's going to flicker quite a bit still. And everything else, it also can depend on the speed. But let's go ahead and let this run to 200 frames, and we'll come check on it and see how it looks when it's done. Okay, our video is done here, and let's go ahead and render it. And that was our old one there with the flickering. And our first one was too high, and just like Goldilocks, this one should be just right. Well, not really. There's no such thing as just right. You're going to want to add in a lot more stuff here besides just this. I just want to give you kind of a good baseline, and getting the forward movement, speed, and the strength kind of aligned with each other is a great place to start, because this will also be affected by your speed, your forward speed. But let's go ahead and look at what we got here now. So we can see we are still getting some flickering, but it's maintaining a lot of coherency. Like this tower is staying kind of in the same place. The hills are kind of staying in the same place. It's not like drastically changing the image too much. So something like this would be kind of a good baseline to kind of start making your 3D movies at. I'd recommend just doing this a few times, just getting used to making, the forward movement and getting your strength setting where you want it. And it can also be affected by the prompts. Some prompts might be a little more prone to drastic bad changes as well. And this can also be affected by things like your scale. Right now I have, I should mention a little more maybe about this too. The scale's at 8, which is usually where I keep it, around 8 to 10. Usually if it gets higher, you can get a lot of changes in the frames. But everything, like I said, everything works in conjunction. Stable diffusion, deformed diffusion is not a solo act, it is an orchestra. And you want all the parts, all the instruments of your orchestra to be playing in harmony with each other. So that's the goal really of this tutorial, is to kind of show you how to do that. And so the next thing we'll get into, we're going to go ahead and get into all the other movement keys there. Hey everybody, so while I was editing this video, I just decided that I didn't want to cut out too much from this beginning part. So what I decided to do is actually break this video up into at least two parts, possibly three. I don't know, I will see on the next one. But I believe it's really important to kind of keep these things, especially here in the beginning, to get a good solid basis for making 3D videos. So the rest of this video will be continued in the part two, where we will get into the movements and a little more on keyframes.